Hello, I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to the Heartbeat, the place where I talk about just a few of the things that make this little guy tick. Today, I'm going to be talking about episode 10 of season 2 of AMC's Better Call Saul. Join me, won't you? So, per usual, we're going to be talking about a few of the positives in this week's episode, a few of the negatives, as well as what we're looking forward to next season. Yes, season 3 on Better Call Saul, starting roughly somewhere in February 2017. Now, to be completely honest with you guys, there were a number of elements that didn't completely blow my socks off on this episode. But first, let's focus on what did work on this week's Better Call Saul season 2 finale, titled Click. First of all, the episode opened with a fun bait and switch where we discovered that it wasn't Jimmy waiting in the hospital with a concussed Chuck, but a flashback of the two brothers waiting at the bedside of their dying mother. And the way that that reveal was handled was one of a couple of instances which made me really think, man, this show is so often like its central characters, and in this instance, quite like Slippin' Jimmy, luring us in, making us believe one thing only to just switch directions and reveal something else. And in this instance, kind of just for the fun of it. And the other central character that this show so often reminds me of is Mike, but more on that in a second. First, back to the top of the episode, though I initially found it odd that we weren't seeing the death of Jimmy and Chuck's father, since their relationship with that man has been referenced so much more this season, I actually ended up enjoying Gilligan's choice to take us back to the death of their mother, just in how it continued to expand their history. And though the beats are becoming a tad bit repetitive, the scene did continue to reinforce exactly who the McGill brothers are. Jimmy ever needing someone to validate his selfishness, in this case stepping away from their dying mother to get some hoagies, as well as Chuck being unable to not only illuminate to others just how crooked his brother is, but also fail to receive the kind of love and affection that his brother seems to receive so effortlessly. And looking at the season as a whole, that really did seem to be one of its primary objectives. Expanding, certainly, muddying, definitely, but perhaps even completely reversing in our minds who Jimmy and Chuck are, and who actually might be the more manipulative, vindictive, and selfish of the two. Because if you look at that flashback scene specifically, it really does seem to be reinforcing in our minds that yes, Jimmy is definitely selfish, but more often in a mischievous way that's childish and nearsighted and really unable to grasp the full consequences of such actions. I mean, to jump to the end of the episode, how much more proof do we need than when Chuck said to Jimmy, "You do realize you just confessed a felony," and all Jimmy said in response was, "I guess, but you feel better, right?" That's so Jimmy's perspective. In the moment, are things all right? If the answer is yes, then who cares about the long-term consequences? In the same way, where Jimmy only recollected that their mother's birthday was fun, all Chuck can remember is the whole family cleaning up after him. Both men beheld the exact same event, but responded so very differently, and the memory of that same party was actually a paradigm for Chuck as well. A man who, quite to the contrary, can never seem to get over those long-term consequences, and part of me honestly understands where he's coming from and wants to give him grace because of it. I mean, he has always been the son, the brother, the friend, and the husband who's fought to do the right thing in the right way. But whose word did his father listen to? Whose jokes did his wife laugh at? Whose name did his mother call with her final breath? Jimmy's. And then when Jimmy suddenly wanted to be a lawyer too, of course Chuck felt threatened, and we felt that threat all season long. And then on top of that, we get these extremely effective shots, like the upside-down angle of Chuck strapped to that gurney being pushed, prodded, and poked against his will, which have allowed us to empathetically understand this man's pain. But what's continued to muddy the waters was something that even the often clueless Ernesto seems to have picked up on, that being, he's really got it out for you, Jimmy. I mean, the glee in Chuck's eyes, concussed though he was as he looked up at Jimmy in that print shop. He won. He got him, and he knew it. And he was finally going to show the world just how horrible his brother was. And just in this episode alone, mirroring that same look almost exactly, we also got Chuck's response to Jimmy's recorded confession. Not to mention the way in which that confession was gotten. Chuck straight up conned his brother, really knowing the exact notes to play to draw that truth out of him. So now we've got Slippin' Jimmy and Cryin' Chuck. These two are brothers through and through. There were, however, a couple of other moments that really revealed a much more tragically unnoticed bond between the McGills. The moment where Chuck, all alone, broke down at his mother's bedside, and the moment where Jimmy, all alone, touched the grounding rod just outside his brother's house. In both instances, there was no conning going on because there was no one there to con. There was just those men, by themselves, honestly communicating their care and concern for their family. And to reveal those colors and shades shades, both about Chuck and Jimmy, I thought to be a rather bold, interesting way to go this season, because what it ultimately did was decelerate our movement towards the wholly corrupt, completely amoral Saul Goodman. But it also stoked my hope that this show will be about so much more than just moving us towards the Saul Goodman that we think we know from the Breaking Bad years, but rather about revealing just how little we understood about that man or his motivation during that time. Because if you look at Jimmy in this episode alone, he started out by leaving his mother's hospital bedside, while later on completely refused to step away from his brothers. And even bigger than that, this show opened back in season 1 with Jimmy fighting to get his brother to quit HHM and cash out his millions of dollars, but now has him fighting to do the exact opposite. And what's really exciting about that final scene was and will be its potential to continue to push Jimmy to even more dynamically different places. Because as I described earlier, up to this point, he's kind of been this mischievous, ignorant child committing these misdemeanors. And even when he has committed felonies, like defecating through a sunroof, Jimmy McGill has always, one way or the other, escaped to break the law another day. But considering that Chuck will definitely not be there to bail him out this time, we can only assume that Jimmy McGill will be forced to change and evolve all the more next season. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the show and just the way that it unfolds has so often reminded me of Slippin' Jimmy himself. But in other instances, it's also really reminded me of Mike, just in how controlled, calculated, and patient it is. Neither Mike nor the show being afraid to take their time. In fact, it seems they're more afraid to actually rush, which can certainly produce the good and also produce the frustrating. On the good side for this episode, that patience did really allow for that brilliant quiet scene between Mike and Lawson. Seeing Mike with someone who is his equal both in professionalism and class does heighten how tragically alone Mike is the rest of the time, as well as ratchet up the tension all the more when Mike, flying solo, goes to take out Hector Salamanca for good. And I've got to say, I was so utterly convinced and terrified that Mike would shoot through Nacho, killing him and crippling Hector. I mean, they even had the moment where Lawson made that comment about needing to make adjustments if Mike was planning to shoot through a pane of glass. But alas, our would-be assassin Airman Trout discovers that he's not so alone at all. And I actually have to stop right now and say, I have come completely around to Gus Fring not being introduced in this episode, because if you completely forget the history that we Breaking Bad viewers have with that character, and the history that we consequently know that he and Hector have had, there has been zero setup for that character on this show. Not even a tease until now that Mike, the ultimate stealthy stalker, is himself being stalked, which is such a cool beginning to this reveal of Gus Fring, because without any sort of build-up, we would have gotten to the end of the season, revealed Gus Fring, and the audience, those who haven't seen Breaking Bad anyways, would go, okay, and that person is? This way, however, which gave us that brilliant moment in sound design where the crickets go silent right before the car horn starts to blare, will now at least allow for the potential of a nice epic build. And what a start to that build we got this episode. Nothing fancy, nothing explosive, just don't. Which did quite humorously remind me of Edgar Wright's joke Grindhouse trailer, Don't. Though, to be fair, guys, I did find that there were a number of elements on this year's finale that were just a little bit disappointing. First off, I felt like there were a number of storylines that they failed to build towards any real climax or conclusion. Those storylines being Jimmy's, Kim's, Mike's, or Chuck's, i.e. everyone. Now, I get it, guys. Yes, this is an ongoing television series, one that has been confirmed to be continuing at least one more year, and I can't expect everything to be wrapped up all nice and neat by the end of each season finale. Nonetheless, on this season finale, there was a sense of, as I call it, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince-ness. Now, for those of you who have not read the Harry Potter series, I am about to spoil a couple things, so perhaps skip ahead a couple of minutes if you don't want to be spoiled here. But in The Half-Blood Prince, which is book 6 of 7, the characters of Ron and Hermione get together, but then don't. And the characters of Harry and Ginny get together, but then don't. And the characters of Harry and Dumbledore find a Horcrux, but then don't. Because if they did, those relationships and plot points would have reached their conclusive destination, and of course that couldn't occur until the subsequent and final book. All of which sort of led to this feeling of treading water, this feeling of neither are we going to move the plot forwards, nor are we going to give you anything much more than a rehearsal of what's going to happen next time. No, before you guys all freak out, I happen to really like Harry Potter quite a bit and thought the 7th book ended things in a rather spectacular fashion. Nonetheless, were we to draw a comparison between the 6th book of that series and the 2nd season of this series, as it stands right now, and again, everything could change next season, but as it stands currently, it felt a bit like Gilligan on the season finale was neither moving the plot forwards all that much, nor really giving us much more than a rehearsal of what was going to happen next. So, for example, Jimmy and Kim's relationship has grown more and more strained this season to the point of us asking, okay, When is this going to erupt? And finally, on this episode, Chuck received that silver bullet to take Jimmy down, and though that confession didn't directly incriminate Kim, it certainly connected her to Jimmy's felony enough to make her feel that burn as well. But we have to wait until next season to see how much damage it actually caused the pair. In the same way, we've really been building towards the unveiling of the first Give Me Jimmy ad, which though it perfectly praised our hero's upstanding and trustworthy character right at the moment he was feeling the least upstanding and trustworthy, thus tainting that commercial success, we again will have to wait until next season to see just how much. Now, something that made Breaking Bad as incredible as it was, and something that Better Call Saul has emulated in its better moments, was just its narrative fearlessness. It killed characters, it destroyed meth labs, it revealed secrets and jumped ahead in time, so rarely shying away from actions that would leave an indelible mark or force a change in direction. Along with that, unlike last year's finale, which pushed Jimmy to make a new ultimatum that doing the right thing would never stop him again, this year's finale so often felt like Vince Gilligan was retreading some of the same dynamics, issues, and problems that these characters have had all season long, and some of them that I thought they'd moved past. Jimmy was back to honestly representing the elderly. We got another flashback of a McGill family member siding with Jimmy over Chuck, and Chuck once again found himself in the hospital, the exact same doctor proving once again that his allergy to electricity was all in his head and consequently encouraging Jimmy to commit him, which Jimmy did temporarily make a different decision on, only to shrink back and take his brother home. And the second thing that this finale failed to do for me was really bring together Jimmy and Mike's storylines. Yes, both characters absolutely remain as fascinating and as engaging as ever, but this episode in particular, if only because it was a finale, felt distractingly disjointed as each character just continued to plow their own field. In the end though, none of these issues really did lead me to despair, because what they told me was simply, in a very controlled and intentional way, this episode pumped the brakes. It told me that, yes, Jimmy McGill had made some strides towards Saul Goodman this season. Some legitimate strides. But he's not that character. Not yet. Yes, we saw him don those colorful, flamboyant suits, but they're certainly not his normal wardrobe. Yes, we saw him shoot a TV commercial, but it was still aimed at a distinctly different demographic than his Better Call Saul ads. In short, what this episode told me was Better Call Saul is just not yet ready for Saul. So, though I did feel some dissatisfaction in certain elements of this finale episode, I still have faith in Vince Gilligan and company, and if they deem that it's not yet time for those plot lines to come together, or for Mike to pull that trigger, or for Hector to end up in that wheelchair, or to unveil Gus Fring, or to push Jimmy to abandon his name, or implode Jimmy and Kim's relationship, then okay, I will wait as patiently as I can, and I do suppose I prefer them to tread water for an episode versus sprint past an important plot point, or not quite stick its landing, though the next episode doesn't really occur until 2017. But fortunately for all of us, there will be a few distractions between now and then. As I'm sure many of you are well aware, Game of Thrones Season 6 does start next Sunday, which I do plan on reviewing week to week, just as I have on Better Call Saul. One thing I do want to do differently, though, with Game of Thrones is actually interact with you guys just a little bit more. So if you could actually hop on over to Twitter, and I'll leave a link for that below, go ahead and follow me at Chris Hartwell, and then go ahead and tweet out your comments, questions, or predictions, hashtagging all of them the Heartbeat, and each week I'll do my best to answer a few of them right here on the show. But before you do that, definitely comment below and let me know what you thought of this finale episode of Season 2 of AMC's Better Call Saul. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What worked for you? Are you really looking forward to next season? Are you still on board for Better Call Saul? Comment below and let me know. Also, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you all to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.